Charisma Quotient. I'm your host, Kim Seltzer, a dating and makeover expert, where I will help you build confidence, make connections, and find love from the outside in. I want to talk today about a little word that has a big impact, and that is no. Just no. When you hear that word, how do you feel? Because maybe you find it intimidating or uncomfortable, or perhaps you grew up learning that the word is impolite and inconsiderate. I mean, after all, if you consider yourself a nice person, you should do things for others, right? And that is the right thing to do. You might feel more obligated to go along with things you honestly do not want to do in order to be helpful or accepted. In a world that is often reinforced with busyness and people pleasing, learning to say no can be a revolutionary act of self care and empowerment. And whether it's setting boundaries in your personal relationships, which includes people you are dating, by the way, prioritizing your own needs and desires, or simply honoring your time and energy, saying no is a skill that can transform your life in a profound way. And there are clear benefits to the word no. I mean, saying no can create more mental health stability, believe it or not. This is what research says too, by helping with self care and building your self esteem and confidence by setting boundaries. So, saying no may be a daunting thing to do, but there are ways to make the process easier. But here's the thing. I mean, really, the first step is to know yourself, right? Like to know what makes you tick and what your purpose is, what you like and what you don't like is so crucial because if you are a people pleaser, then you probably been focusing on other people's desires and needs beyond yours in order to keep the peace or be liked or, in your head being nice. But by doing that, you create lopsided relationships where people then take advantage of you and which then you get resentful for. It's this like constant loop that you find yourself in. So you have to learn to really focus on you and what you want and express that on top of that. So the question becomes, do you really know how you are and how true to yourself are you being when you put yourself out there, especially when it comes to dating? I've been recently working with this woman and she's a VIP client of mine. And, she was all gun ho to sign up and, find me a man. She wants to settle down and have the whole like family. She has this dream. But here is the biggest problem that we unraveled is that she had a horrible time expressing her needs and saying no. And she didn't realize how much of a problem that has been, especially in her dating process, that was keeping her stuck and attracting these guys who would take advantage of her. I mean, you can call them narcissists, fixer-uppers, takers, whatever label you want to, give them. They were the same guy in a different costume. And so she found herself after even just our first session together, realizing she had been doing this her whole life and it stemmed from her family system. I mean, she grew up not expressing feelings in her family. And so it was just a foreign language. And so I was so excited because this has literally just happened last week. She's like, Kimmy, I cannot believe how powerful this stuff is. Like, I didn't realize this whole time. The reason why I was getting so frustrated with the guys that I was selecting and picking is because I just wasn't standing up for myself. And I was just giving people like chances over and over and over again, saying, oh, they'll shift, they'll change. And for the first time, this guy who has been like really chasing her, she said to me before she saw him the next day, she's like, Kimmy, I really don't want to go out with him. I just want to be friends. I said, well, how is it going to benefit you to even being friends? Like, what does that mean? And she just gave a long pause and she's like, I don't know. I'm like, so you think that maybe you just want to be friends because probably the pain of just cutting it off is greater than moving it down to friends. But really, how is this going to serve you? She's like, well, I don't think it is. I said, fantastic. So just say no. And so she literally had a call with me it was yesterday. And she's like, Kimmy, I did it. I said, no, I said, I can't do this right now. I'm moving. I really don't have time for a relationship and you've been so great, but no, I don't want to move on. And she just felt so free. And she said now for the first time, she's really ready to like date up a storm and practice this boundary thing. So, I think that overall, when you set boundaries and you learn to say no to the things you don't like and say yes to the things you do, that's when everything starts happening and you just feel more confident overall. So I'm so excited to bring back for the third time a special guest and friend to help me talk about the power of no and why it's so important when it comes to dating and relationships. He is a multiple time TEDx speaker and was recently announced as one of just 15 Success Magazine emerging entrepreneurs. He's also the host of the top-rated Let's Do influencing radio show, founder of growing Blue Talks brand, and has been featured in multiple television specials, an award-winning author, including his recent book, who we're going to talk about, called Enlightened Passenger. A columnist with Entrepreneur and Forbes magazine, he's interviewed over 65,000, I'm sure more, of the world's top leaders, including Deepak Chopra and many others that you'll know. And he has been featured on CBS, NBC, ABC. He's performed stand-up comedy more than 700 times. We bond there because we both were, students of Second City. And now I get to interview him as a top leader. Welcome, Corey Poirier. I think I said it right, right? You have to unmute yourself. There you go.
You did it as well or better than I can do. So you did great. And I will say, yeah, on the comedy side, I miss those days sometimes, and sometimes I'm like, why do I miss those days? So that's a whole mixed breed, is the whole, the comedy world. And I didn't realize it was the third time I've been on the show. And just so I put it out there to the world, whenever the dust settles on what I'm doing right now, we need to bring you on my show and talk about dating for influencers. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Ooh, that'd be a great topic. Yes, I love it. No, I'm happy to have you back over and over and over again because, like, before we even hit record, we were like chatting up a storm for 45 minutes because there's just so much synergy with both of us and what we do. And I love you so much. And it's been like years, since we first met at that Elite Man's conference where I was the only woman talking. But just as a refresher, because you probably don't remember the topics we talked about, last time we're talking about purpose and passion. And then before that, we talked about overcoming shyness and how that really impacts, just people's confidence and stuff overall. But you've now written a book that captures a lot of these themes that we're going to talk about today. But for the people who haven't heard the previous episodes, I always like to have you share a little bit of your story, but also like how it relates to where you are now with this book and what inspired you to write it, because I love it. I love it.
Well, so thank you so much. And yeah, where I'm at now is, and I'll also say to your point, how it relates to how I grew up, which is kind of fascinating, is I live in the same little town that I grew up in, but I made my way slightly around the world in between. So I actually brought myself back to this little town, partially because my common law wife and I decided we should be close to home if we were going to have a family, because both my mother and her father, like I'm an only child, my mom's an only child. I didn't know that I was going to have kids. I didn't have it till late in life. I had 2 kids after 40. And so we felt like we didn't know how long we'd have them. And so, meaning our parents. And so we wanted to raise our children close to them. And so it's a good thing we did, because our oldest is 6. And I just mentioned to you off air, he just lost his papa 6 months ago. So, realistically, he got to experience 6 years of his papa that he wouldn't have if he wouldn't have moved home. So that's kind of what brought us back to this small town. How it relates to who I am now is, I think on one side, I forget this often, but Shelley reminds me and other people remind me that I grew up in a small town, and in a small town where it was kind of believed that ultimately what would happen is you would stay in the small town. Like some of the things that I've been fortunate and blessed to experience, like I have so many people that grew up here saying, it's so amazing that you've done that growing up in this small town. It's weird to me, Kimmy, that I don't think that way, but a lot of people do. And so I think it does reflect on who I am today because uh, I guess that's the best way to say it is that I don't think that impedes a person from success. Like when you grow up in a place. Now, I'll add the caveat to that is 20 years ago, it would have. 30 years ago, it really would have. But now that we're all interconnected and we can do something like this, you being maybe in LA today, me being in tiny little Prince Edward Island today, I leave for Vegas shortly and we could do it. And you could have traveled to the UK and England and we could do another interview. Like things have changed, but I think it relates to who I am today in the sense that we don't have to think small. Like when you're 50 years ago, it was hard to think outside your little town. And if you did, it was like, okay, I got to move to another town and then do everything I want to do there. And if I want to think bigger, I got to move to another town and do everything there. Now you don't even have to leave and you can still live the life of your dreams. I guess I don't know if that's a kind of weird way to start, but that's how I think who I am and how I grew up relates to who I am today. And I was raised by a single mother, grew up in a small town, like I said, barely graduated from high school, didn't know the difference between fiction and nonfiction, didn't read my first book till age 27. One of my teachers gave me a 49 plus one when I needed a 50. What you can also take from that is not only does it matter where you were born, it also really doesn't matter what happened in the past. It's what you do now or next.
Mm. Oh, I love that. Yeah, that just hit home. And I relate a lot to that kind of like growing up in a small town. Even though I grew up in Chicago, there was kind of this what we call Midwest mentality of, you know, playing it safe. It was a very kind of safe town, but also in the ways of like where success lies, right? Like it's like here's your path and here's the trajectory of what your life is going to be. And it was a very traditional, kind of life. And this relates to the topic that I want to talk about with the whole notion of no. In at least in my hometown, and I think yours too, because like I think it's very similar, the culture of it was like we had to be nice and do things for other people. And that was the beautiful part of growing up in a very like tight community. But at the same time, I felt like it was very stifling and that there wasn't a lot of room for like growth and bigger, think bigger and saying yes to risky things, that kind of thing. So saying no is just safer too. Like I had learned that growing up. So I don't know if you felt that too, because did you grow up in that, like where it was hard for you to say no? Like what inspired you with this topic too? I was just curious.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm also, I could touch upon as well. I mean, if we get there on the dating side,
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
with my partner for almost 10 years. And, a lot of when we talked about moving back to a small town, I'll go there after if we get there, but I will say, there's challenges even around this no and yes within a relationship
Yeah.
because a yes to somebody is a no to somebody else. And so, for instance, I'm thinking of this on the relationship side, and then I'll answer the question more directly. But like Shelly, honestly, doesn't get enough of the credit for the fact that more often than not, I'm the one out on the road speaking. People get to see me, and she's home taking care of two young kids, as we talked about, that are pretty intense because they're two young boys. But she's doing that, and at the same time, bragging me up to people. Like she went to the local bookstore and said, "Oh, I don't know if you know what he's doing in our little town. You need to bring him in for a book signing." And now they're buying like 15 copies of my book to bring in. And like, so she did that, even though she's at home while I'm out on the road. But why I say this, Kimmy, is because each time I say yes to something, in a
Mm.
lot of ways, I'm saying no to her and the family. And whenever I say yes to something with them, I'm saying no to another opportunity. And so I think sometimes we forget it's a cause and effect as well when we say yes and no. But directly to your point, I share this often. My grandfather, when I grew up, who was the salt of the earth, great carpenter with a grade 3 education, built a fiberglass space shuttle. Grade 3 education, never did that in his life, just did it randomly, never told a soul. We had to tell everybody he did that, and then he'd get blushed, and then he talked about it for hours, but he didn't want to tell anybody he did it. My grandfather always told me, just say yes. Opportunities come when you say yes.
Uh,
Now, you got to remember, too, it depends on what field you're in, right? Like he was in carpentry. He worked for one client at a time. And most of his business came from referral because he was so liked and so good. So it was like a client would say, "Can you do this?" Yes, because it was a job. And it was like, and he loved what he did, but it was like, yes, I'll take on this job because otherwise I won't put food on the table. So it was a bit different. It depends on your context. But what I found is for those that, I'll say it both ways. For those in the, let's say first on the own your own business or influence world or leader in a company, what I've discovered is, and so I'll go back, I guess first I should answer that. Yes, I grew up being told to say yes to everything. And then
Yeah.
what changed for me is I started interviewing all these top leaders. And guess what I noticed? Most of them are saying no 20 times more often than the average person. And so like now we got a problem because I've been told by the person I admire the most to say yes to everything. But now the research I'm doing is showing I should be saying no. And so I had a conflict in a big way. In the small town, it wasn't just my grandfather. Everybody thought you should just say yes. And it's interesting now how we're starting to define the word nice differently than kind. But,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
like we were all being nice. And I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with that, but it's just nice was yes. Like, yes. Oh, I better be nice and say yes. What will they think if I say no? Will they tell the neighbor, don't talk to him? He said no to me. And I think of the episode of Seinfeld where Jerry, I forget what he wouldn't do, but it was like he wouldn't chip in or something in the apartment, or he wouldn't hug everybody anymore. They want to hug and kiss. And he said, no, I got to put a stop to it. And then all of a sudden they wouldn't open the door for him. They gave him dirty look. They marked all over his face on the inside of the apartment. And so to me, that was like Jerry wasn't nice. So now let's punish him. He said no, let's punish him. And so that was kind of what I was taught, is that if you said no, it was a bad trait. And then, like I said, all of a sudden I do these interviews and I discover that all these thought leaders are saying no. And here's the key thing. They know what to say no to. So they're saying no to all the things that don't move the needle to what their goal is. And so then all of a sudden I had to figure out, okay, how do I reconcile with this? Knowing I'm not doing what my grandfather recommended, at the same time, recognizing that he didn't live the same life as me. So he wasn't out in the world I'm in. And so I realized the people that I was wanting to become were saying no 20 to 50 times more than everybody else. So I needed to figure out quickly, what's a no to Corey? How do I say no without burning a bridge? And how often do I say no? And where this gets, there's two directions we could go, Kimmy, because I always struggle because somebody could be listening to this who's looking to find the love of their life.
Yeah.
At the same time, so there's the no in terms of the dating side. Then they could also work a job where they have two managers and they're thinking, well, is Corey saying I could say no to them? And what I would say to that is I would say, have the conversation with the manager and say, let's figure out what a no and a yes is. Because you might be surprised sometimes in your work world that your manager might think you should say no more to certain things. But what I'm saying is don't say Corey said say no and then lose your job. So I'm saying like, set some expectations. Then you got the other extreme, which is your friends. So your friend says, Kimmy, can you help me move? And I need you to help me move my couch and my this and that. And then do I say no to that person? And how do I say no? So what I mean is there's multiple layers to what the no is about. So the takeaway to me should be, we need to know what's a good no and a bad no. So again, saying no to your boss when they say, hey, let's say part of your job is to make the copies for the meeting. And the boss said, can you go make me some copies, Rebecca? No, Corey said I don't have to. That's not a good no, because I don't want you to lose your job over saying no. But it could be, another scenario where somebody comes in who doesn't even work in your department and says, hey, don't say anybody. Can you do this for me? Maybe that's a no. And maybe you talk to your manager and say, what do I do if that happens? That could be a no. Or like I said, you could be at the office. You may have to say yes to most things, but then you get home and you've had a long day and somebody wants you to go help them move at the last minute. You may have to say, well, I'd love to help, but, and if you want, I can dive into how I decide what a no and a yes is, and also how to do it without burning a bridge. But I did want to answer that question by saying, yes, I grew up being told to say yes to everything. And the catch-22 is no is going to be different depending on what role you're looking at the yes and no in.
No, I'm really glad you distinguished that, because it gets really confusing. And like and I do want to kind of dive into like the whole dating part, but just to almost put a summary to what you said, it all boils down to really knowing who you are and what you want in all of those aspects, right? Like whether it's career or dating or friendship, it's really being able to stop and pull in and say, well, wait a second, how is this going to serve me? How would this benefit me? What is it that I really want? And then that will determine how you move forward with somebody and then how it gets communicated, right? There's so many different layers, and I'm sure your book, touches upon a lot of this stuff. But the dating part, it gets tricky because when you're used to your whole life saying yes to everything, how can you know exactly what it is you want and how to say no to like a guy or a girl in certain ways? So you were gonna mention or talk about a story that related to dating in the beginning. Was that was that a personal story?
Well, I mean, just more on the side of it was gonna be to talk about like, you know, first of all, I mean, you talk about this probably often, and there's the dating side, and then I guess there's the long-term relationship. But
Right.
in each case, what I've discovered is it's never easy, meaning there is work involved. And I think
Yes.
sometimes people think like so, and again, there's no absolutes in the world. So there's obviously people out there where it just fits and they've never, it's just never been difficult or never been work. But what I've seen is for most of the people that stay in long-term relationships, there is some work involved. And it could be work you love, but there's still, you got to care about the person. You got to maybe do a little bit for them. Maybe you have to listen sometimes, like that kind of stuff that's involved. And so what I was going to say is, we're 10 years. We had the 7-year itch. We had a really rough year in our 7th year. And now, like, we've moved way past it. And it's like, both of us couldn't, honestly, I can say right now, as of today, both of us couldn't imagine being with somebody else or having somebody else for the rest of our life in our life. I don't think anything could tolerate me for more than, that much longer than 10 years. But having said that, what I was going to say is that it was more related to that idea that you need to know how yes and no fits into your relationship. So what I'm getting at is Shelly understands the work that both of us are doing, because she does some of it with me too, is changing lives. Like we have people message us saying, I'm in tears now because I just did this and you guys helped me do this. She knows that's the work we're doing. Like every week, there's at least one person that sends a message saying how their life was impacted. And so she understands how important that is. And that's why she doesn't say no often to me whenever I say I need to do this. At the same time, because she rarely says no, if she says, I need you to jump in and do this, I rarely say no. What I'm getting at is that you need to know what that is in a relationship, because if you say no all the time to a person in the ways that doesn't fulfill them and doesn't
Yeah.
align with your beliefs, then that relationship probably isn't going to last very long. So what I'm getting, you need to feel out what's okay to say no to and what's okay to say yes to, and why it's okay or not. Meaning, like in our case, most of the things that she says yes to, which means she's having to say no to something else, is a situation where she knows we're trying to change somebody's life. So that's big work, is my opinion. But if I were saying I want to go on vacation just because I've had a hard week, then she might dig her heels and say no.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think mentioned this to you off air. She's going away tomorrow to North Carolina to watch a band that she likes, and then she's going to Boston, and I'm staying home with the kids. And that was a hard yes, because I'm in the middle of a launch and everything else. But I know how many times she's had to say no to stuff to say yes to me. So I don't know if that makes sense, but what I'm saying is, again, there's more layers that even within a relationship, you may have to say no sometimes, you may have to say yes, but I think you also need to realize what's a realistic no and yes and what's a fair no and yes to say.
Yeah. Well, and to just like recap all that, it's like, well, first you have to know what you want. Then there's the piece of how you express it. Then it's understanding the other person's point of view and hear, how that would impact them. And then you have to consider the relationship. So no wonder it gets so hard for people because there's so many layers to this. It's funny because you mentioned when we were writing back and forth what we're going to talk about a mission statement. And I loved when you said that, because I don't know if you know this, but I help my clients create dating mission statements before. And you probably didn't know that. And what is so perfect, and this is like relates to what you're saying, is that like a lot of my clients will go, and vet their next boyfriend and girlfriend, and they're going online, and And I make them create the mission statement first because mostly in the beginning stages, it really isn't about finding the boyfriend or girlfriend. It's actually about overcoming some challenges or habits that they have so that they can have healthier relationships, later on. So I like this one woman, her mission was to flirt and have fun with everyone. Like that was her mission statement. And then she goes and she's like vetting every guy as if they were her boyfriend. So she was saying no. I'm like, well, in this instance, you should not be saying no. You should be saying yes because your mission statement has nothing to do with a boyfriend. It's to learn how to flirt. So you should say yes. So this
So
is right.
they
Like
do
this
go
is why.
together.
Yeah.
And I think I told you, I don't know if I mentioned this in our conversation about it, but I was going to tell you how I decide what a no and a yes is. And it actually, you're doing a good segue because it ties into my mission statement. One thing, if you're okay with it, that I'll tell people, and then I can, we can dive into the mission statement side.
Yeah.
But one thing I'd like to tell people before we move away from no completely,
Hmm.
because I think it's really significant. It changed everything for me is how to decide what a no and a yes is. Now, I'll tie that into the mission statement. So the other thing I'll mention first is also how do you say no without burning a bridge?
Yeah.
Because that's the other side is that we can talk saying no all the time we want, but if let's say if we want to get the attention of influencers, but we say no to 80% of them, they're going to talk and tell other people, I didn't like that person. They just flat out said no to me. So you have to know how to say no. Well, I'll tell you, and you can I'll say you can revise this to use it or adjust it to use that as you need. But where it came from, the way to say no without burning a bridge that I fell in love with was I did an interview with a person named Shalene Johnson. And was the creator of Turbo Jam, but also she's an Instagram influencer. And so I was interviewing her back in the days when she had Turbo Jam. And she was saying how there were like 600 classes they were running across the US for Turbo Jam at one point. And so the ones that were close to her, some of the instructors would reach out and say, hey, Shalene, I had this come up. Any chance you can fill in for the class tonight? And she's trying to grow the business, like work on the business, but she kept getting pulled into the business because she felt bad saying no. So finally, if I remember correctly, she said what she started doing is because all the instructors knew that they're a very family oriented business, what she started saying is, okay, how about this? I need to talk to Brett to make sure he didn't book something for our family or we don't have something to do with the family taking place then. If we do, with your permission, I'll find somebody else who can fill in. If we don't, then of course I'll do my best to fill in. And so first of all, how do you get mad at somebody that's saying it that way? Like, I just need to make sure that we didn't already promise our kids we're going to do something and I'm now letting them down. But what she said, which was even more fascinating, is by the time 2 days came around and she went back to the person, they're like, I already figured it out.
Ah,
90% would figure it out. So then she didn't even have to offer helping them find somebody. So what's great about it is whatever that thing is, you need to find the thing that says that's realistic, that I need to check in on this first. And then B, you're offering to help them anyway, even if it's not you, it's somebody else. How do you get mad at that? And then C, often it takes care of itself in the interim. So to me, I started doing that and I thought it was such a powerful way to decide, or sorry, a way to say no without getting somebody mad at you. And then go back to the mission statement. The mission statement is what helps me decide what a no and a yes is. And you mentioned it with your client, how you said to her, no, that's a yes, not a no, because her mission statement tells her that. So I think if everybody had their own personal mission statement and it was designed around what they're trying to accomplish or achieve or become, I think they would know quickly what a yes and a no is. So for me, mine is to be the guy who motivates, donates, educates, entertains, and inspires. That's my 5-point test. And so if you ask me to do something, if it's 0 of those, it can be the easiest no in my life without regret. If it's 4 or 5 of those, it's the easiest yes in my life without regret. So the mission statement tells me instantly what a yes and a no is. And then, like I said, I get to decide what is the thing I need to check before I answer this fully. So even just giving yourself the time to think about the answer and not just saying, okay, I'll do it, could be the difference maker. Just like that person you said about they didn't want to date this person, but maybe I should be friends.
yeah.
But the interim of you being able to talk to them gave them the permission to stand up and say, you know what? No, that's not a good move. But if you wouldn't have been there for them, that would have been a yes. And they'd be in that friendship for 5 years of that other person thinking there's something more going to happen. I'm going to convince them soon.
100%. Yes. And that's the road that it was going down. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love that. Well, and I'm sure I'm looking at the time already. I'm like, how did we get here already? Because I want to talk about your book a little bit, and I'm sure, a lot of the stuff that you're bringing up is in the book. Do you want to just, mention what it's about and how it can help people with all the things that we've been talking about, from boundary setting to saying no to finding your passion and purpose, because it is all related.
Yeah, it is. And so the book itself is a fictional parable. It's two strangers on a plane, old guy, young guy. The young guy doesn't want to be seated next to anybody. He's a high class executive making a large amount of revenue a year, but not keeping much of it because he's young and he's partying a lot. But he doesn't know how to keep it, and he doesn't know how to create real wealth. So he ends up falling asleep, wakes up, there's an old guy next to him that got bumped from economy, and he didn't want to pay attention. He's going to try to fake sleeping until he discovers the old guy through conversation. The old guy's like really persistent, but just like a friendly persistent, like charismatic. And he's like, he gets wind that the old guy's made some money. So he's like, oh, I want to figure out how he did that. Maybe it's different than me. And he starts listening. And so the book is basically the elder guy, the wise guy that's described like as a Wayne Dyer-esque person, that kind of energy and look and space. That person starts revealing this great life wisdom. And so he ultimately ends up delivering 10 life lessons. That it's called The Flight That Changes Everything, is the subheader of the book. And the idea is Robert, the young passenger, is going to learn how to become richer as a person overall. And so the book is written kind of in the style, for those that might be familiar with The Alchemist, or The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari by Robin Sharma, or the Celestine Prophecy, or Ogmandino, any of his books. So parable that basically, I always say, tricks you into learning, because it's a great story, hopefully, that pulls you in. And at the end, you're like, oh my God, look at all I've learned. And so what's interesting about our conversation is things that we talked about are all weaved into the book. So why the power of no is important, why we should have a personal mission statement. And there's 10 lessons, and the personal mission statement is game changing to me. It's not even one of the full lessons. It's just like a little thing within a lesson. Another one is, how would you live your last 24 days on Earth? And not to give much away, but I'll just say that chapter is called The Mayfly. And Kimmy, what I discovered, I don't know if you know this, the mayfly is a little fly. And I didn't know this until I heard something on Everybody Loves Raymond. And one of the characters wanted the mayfly. And then I'm like, well, I want to research this thing because of what he said. And the mayfly, the male mayfly lives 24 hours and dies. The female lives 3 to 5 minutes. So she lives long enough to give birth, to keep the cycle going. And so in the book, Treb asked Robert, if you were the mayfly and you only had 24 hours, what would you do with those 24 hours? And then he tries to teach him how to imagine your perfect day. And then every day, imagine a new perfect day and live that day. And he posed the question because Robert starts listening. I'd learn to play guitar. I'd learn to do this. I'd call my ex-girlfriend. And he said, you do all that in 24 hours? Anyway, but he lists all these things. And he said, here's my follow-up question. Why aren't you doing that now? If this is what you would do in your last day, why aren't you living your life like that today? So that's another example of the type of thing covered in the book. One other one is what I call the 1%. Rule. And basically, it came about because I was interviewing an elite skating coach who worked with Sidney Crosby, who helped him come back from his injury. And I said, Doug's his name, and I said, Doug, how can you teach Sidney Crosby anything? The dude knows like how to do 99% of it well. I mean, he's at the highest level, better than almost any other hockey player. How can you even teach him something? He goes, you said the key word right there, Corey. He said 99%. What about that other 1%? And he said, what I'm trying to do, and Sidney's hiring me to do, is to help him with that 1% where he needs to improve. And that might be 20% for somebody else. But the point is, do we know what the 1% is? Because I believe our biggest gains in life are in that 1%. And just like Neil Donald Walsh, who wrote Conversations with God, he has a great quote that says, life begins at the end of our comfort zone. Well, I think the end of our comfort zone is the 1%. I think life begins, like, for example, for me, now I'm actually uncomfortable being comfortable. So I started out being uncomfortable, being uncomfortable. Now I'm uncomfortable if I'm too comfortable. But it took a long time to get there. Well, I had to work on my 1%. And I feel the person I am today, the greatest parts of it are because once I got past the comfort zone, that's when that great part started. Well, I think the same. Our best part is our 1% because we figured out the 99. Whether it took us years or we figured it out naturally. But what about that 1% where we haven't fully dialed in and crushed it yet? So again, in the book, we make the case for how do you find out what your 1% is that you need to improve on? Hint, it could be just asking people in a mastermind you're in, or your network, or even posting on Facebook if you're brave enough. Think about how powerful this would be for dating. If you could go to somebody you could trust and they didn't have an agenda and it wasn't the guy or girl you're trying to date, and you could say, why do you think I'm not meeting people? Like you could go to a Kimmy and Kimmy could figure out what the 1% is. But what I'm saying is, think about that compared to doing it on your own and never working on the 1%. Maybe the 1% in the dating world is what keeps you single the rest of your life, even though you don't want to be single.
That's a beautiful, I really, really, it's such a powerful thing that you just said about that 1% thing. And it does apply to dating. And really what comes to me as you were talking is that where the 1% is usually where fear is. Because in that, and fear always stops us from change every single time. But to your point, the only time people do change is in a state of discomfort, not comfort. And so for the people out there, like you listening, if you're saying, well, this all sounds great, but how do I get over my fears of saying no or people not liking me and all the stuff when you've been doing it for so long? Well, what I'm hearing you say is actually embrace that. Like embrace that fear, that 1%, because that's where you need to work. And right, like you'll attract something so different when really like work on that, because it is where the success happens. It's so true. I love it. Oh
Well,
my gosh, friend.
okay, can I give you, do I have time for one little nugget?
Yes, please. I was just going to ask you for one last nugget. Yeah.
Okay, well, I was going to build on what you just said because I want to make sure I don't leave people with no strategy around what we just said.
Yeah.
So what I would say is about the comfort zone. I have a TED talk. My third TED talk is on how to expand your comfort zone. And
just your third TED talk. I like how you threw that in.
I did my fifth one last week, just so you know, or 2 weeks ago.
Oh
in
my
Troy,
God.
Alabama.
Amazing.
So yeah, and I have a call, and this like I'm a side tangent, but I have a call tomorrow with somebody who wants to talk to me about doing one, and I wanted to retire at 5, so I don't know what I'm going to do, Kimmy. I'll let you know. I know the guy who claims he's the world-class record holder of TEDx has done 11.
Oh, wow.
But I don't want to do more than 5, so we'll see what happens. But having said that, going back to that point in terms of a strategy. So my third TED talk, if a person watches that, it'll go through all this. But basically, the talk is called "How to Crush Your Fears and Expand Your Comfort Zone." But in it, I talk about how to expand your comfort zone. So when you said, like, if you're listening to this thing, how do I start saying no? Here's what I give for a strategy in there. In essence, I mean, there's one side is a buddy system. So have a buddy that's also committing to saying no. Let's say it's saying no, and then they say no too, and you compare scores. Did you do it? Oh my God, you did it. Or maybe they even go with you. They buddy with you to say no, whatever that looks like. Or they help you. They're right there beside you. And you're about saying, yes, I'll help you move your house. And Kimmy's sitting there going, while you're on the phone, like the buddy thing will help you a lot because it's like, well, I don't want to let Kimmy down. So I have to say no to them because I like Kimmy more than that person that I would say yes to normally. Like there's that side. But the bigger one is what I did originally is I drew a circle and I listed what was inside my comfort zone and what was outside. And so let's end up comedy for me was one that I did, as you know, and we talked earlier about it. It was outside my comfort zone. So how I did that is I broke it down into baby steps. So what are the things you'd have to do to ever get on a stand-up stage? So I said, okay, maybe I go to a comedy clinic. So go watch other comics. Maybe I go to attend a comedy workshop. Maybe I take a comic for lunch and pick their brain. Maybe I grab the Comedy Bible by Judy Carter and dive in. Maybe I watch HBO comedy specials and write what works. What is the stuff that's working? So that's my baby steps. Each one of them I give myself a reward because I want more. So I give myself, say, if that was 5 things, I give myself 5 rewards. Each time I do one of those, I give myself a new reward. But what happens, I find, Kimmy, is after you've gone down that path, it could take you 3 months, but you've done all those things to prepare. By the time you're ready to get on a stand-up stage, you're like, that's it? Because you've already the world of comedy, you've learned from other comics, you learned how to deal with heckling and all that. Doesn't mean you're going to knock it out of the park. But now you're like, I sat with these people that had the same fear. I talked to him and he said, oh, I was terrified when I started. What I'm saying is by going through all those little baby steps, it gets easier to finally take the big step. So if we take this whole thing, full circle it back to saying no, what it maybe means is you start saying no to things that don't matter to you. Meaning like somebody says something and you would already say, I'll think about it or whatever. Then you say no. Like you just basically start working your no muscle. So maybe the no isn't to like a date. Maybe the no isn't to a best friend who asks you for something. It's smaller ones. Maybe you can say no to your mom and your mom's like, you got to do this. And you're like, no. Whereas before you might have said, mom, you always say that stuff or whatever. Literally start saying no and then get silent and, see the repercussions, but give yourself a reward because you spoke up and said no. So for me, what I would say is take the no and build a no muscle before you have to do a big no. That might be your way to do it. And again, you'll like those rewards. So you'll want to keep doing that. And then when you have 5 or 6 baby no's, the hard no gets a lot easier. So that's a strategy, at least, to start the process.
I love it. I love it, love it, love it. It's about exposure. It's about repetition. It's about practice. And overall, then that builds your confidence. And so it is so powerful. And I think what you're alluding to too is it's just starting small. Cause like saying no to something big is super scary, but something small, you can at least practice. So Corey, thank you so, so much for coming on again. I love this conversation. I could have you on again and again. And please, like everybody, like get his book. It's so amazing. I can't wait to read the whole thing. So Corey, thank you so much. So thanks for joining me today. This has been the Charisma Quotient. I'm your host, of course, Kimmy Seltzer. And remember, you can build confidence, make connections, and find love from the outside in. And if you want to know more, make sure you go to my site, as always, kimmyseltzer.com. If you haven't heard, I have a special retreat coming up in June. It's just for women, and it's called Spark Your Sexy. And it's it's going to be amazing. I only have 4 spots left, but I wanted to hop on and let you know about it in case you were interested. This is to ignite what I call the 5 F's: fun, friendship, fashion, flirting, and femininity. So if you are interested, definitely contact me. You can do that by going to askkimmy.com. That's askkimmy.com. And we can see if it's a fit. All right. Well, hopefully we can chat about that sooner than later. And remember, working on you is working on your dating life. That's all for now.